climate change impacts. Let's go live.
20 years ago, a very remarkable Australian decided to protect a bigger area and make it part of Kakadu National Park. And of course, that very remarkable Australian was Prime Minister Bob Hawke, who joins me here today. That was a big decision to extend further protections to Kakadu. And it was a big decision that was hotly politically debated at the time. It was very, very strongly opposed by the Liberal Party and the National Party. And a fear campaign was run that if these protections went ahead and Prime Minister Bob Hawke extended Kakadu National Park, that would be the end of mining in our nation. In fact, I have with me a clip from the Sydney Morning Herald, a news report from the time, that says Coronation Hill to make or break the mining industry. That was the nature of the fear campaign at the time, being run by the Liberal Party and the National Party. Now here we stand 20 years later, with the mining industry in the midst of resources boom Mark II, with more than $600 billion of investment in the pipeline. And I don't think you'd find one Australian who said that Prime Minister Bob Hawke made the wrong decision. I don't think you'd find one Australian in Parliament House behind me who would say that the wrong decision was taken 20 years ago. I don't think you'd find one Australian in any corner of our nation that would say that was the wrong decision. And here we stand 20 years later, and we're in the midst of another fear campaign by the Liberal Party and the National Party, and they're trying to tell Australians that if we put a price on carbon, that'll be the end of our economy, it'll be the end of mining, it will be the end of life as we know it. And of course this fear campaign is as silly as the fear campaign that Prime Minister Bob Hawke stared down 20 years ago. And we're here talking about Kakadu 20 years later, but we're talking about the new challenge for Kakadu. Today I'm launching this report that talks about the results that climate change can have on Kakadu, the real risks for Kakadu from climate change. It talks particularly about the risks that flow from rising sea levels, more salt water getting into the freshwater systems in Kakadu, changing the nature of the ecology, being a real risk for the native animals that live there, being a real risk for Indigenous communities that still rely on this ecosystem for their bush tucker, and being a real risk for the tourism industry as parts of Kakadu would become inaccessible for parts of the year due to higher water levels. So 20 years after Bob Hawke took a brave decision, we as a nation need to take a brave decision too. A brave decision to price carbon, a brave decision to tackle climate change. And yes, we're in the midst of a fear campaign from the opposition. Just like Bob Hawke stared that fear campaign down, as a nation we need to stare this fear campaign down, get the right thing done by our environment, the right thing done by Kakadu, and move to price carbon. I'll turn now to a man who needs absolutely no introduction from me or anybody else, Bob Hawke.
Thanks, Julia. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here with you, Julia, and it is a very appropriate anniversary of timing, which has a very direct relevance to the challenge that you're facing. The first point I'd like to make is that Julia and her cabinet are absolutely right in terms of the decision they're taking in being prepared to tackle the issue of climate change now and not obfuscate and give in to fear campaigns. Political leadership requires the readiness to make tough and what may at times seem to be unpopular decisions. Julia referred to the fear campaign that I faced 20 years ago, and I tell you what, it was very, very solid. As usual, the Liberal and Country parties led that campaign of fear. The sky was going to fall in, the world would never be the same again. And then, as now, they're supported by the mining industry. And I'll just show you another one of the time. That was from the Sydney Morning Herald. This was from the Australian. can we afford to let Mr Hawke make a $38 billion mistake? Now, that was the nature of the nonsense we were confronted with then. That was $38 billion was the assessment of the assets invested in the mining industry. And if I were allowed to go ahead with the decision that I made, then that was going to end the mining industry as we knew it. Investors were going to be frightened off from Australia. They were going to pull up stumps and go away. Now, you recognise exactly the same nonsense again. Now, I want to say to you, Julia, I congratulate you on the fact that you, like we did 20 years ago, are maintaining the tradition of the Great Australian Labor Party. We are the party, we historically have been the party that are prepared to make the tough decisions, to change the things that we did in government when we grabbed hold of an economy that was just disappearing down the gurgler. Made the tough decisions, a lot of opposition then, but we made the tough decisions. In the environment, we made the decision about saving the Franklin Dam. We had a marvellous record on the environment, but it was a question of always taking into account the need to face the challenge of the environment and also taking account of the need to ensure that we continue to have sustainable economic growth. Now, you are following, Julia, a very considerable tradition, and the opposition here led by Tony. Tony, as I've said, I don't mind Tony personally. I think he's not a bad bloke, but as I said during the campaign, he's as mad as a cut snake. And he is on this issue. He is on this issue. I mean, totally irresponsible. This is a real issue about the sort of country this is going to be for his kids, his grandchildren, and so on. This is what's at issue here. And it's cheap opportunism, this fear that if this decision is taken, it's going to be the end of the mining industry, it's going to be the end of everything else. The decisions that are going to be taken will involve appropriate compensation which will protect households and industry, and at the same time make sure that Australia plays its part in meeting what is undoubtedly the great challenge of our time. So I congratulate you, Julia, on your courage.
Mr. Hawke, correct me if I'm wrong.